the politics in the United States can affect healthcare delivery in the UK. And so it's kind of to your point, is that you have to consider the stakeholders, even those transcontinental stakeholders, and how one affects the other. So let me give you a couple of examples. There has been this kind of, the tariffs are on, the tariffs are off, the tariffs are on, the tariffs are off, but what does it mean? What has happened, irrespective of what the administration's policy is or the state is, the UK has lost AbbVie, AstraZeneca, Eli Lilly have decided to now build their manufacturing operations here in the United States and pulled out of manufacturing operations in the UK. Okay. Now, if you're a US person, you're like, okay, that's great. We've got more manufacturing that's happening now in the United States. But here's where one needs to think, is it the best thing? There's a reason why those companies were manufacturing in the UK. And it's because labor is cheaper and some of the regulations are different, although there are some similarities, but the big one is the labor is cheaper. And there's other type of relationships that the UK has with other countries to get some of the other type of products and services necessary to manufacture some of these drugs at lower costs.
Today on Bluestock Talk, we welcome Dr. Adam Brown, who is an emergency physician, healthcare executive, and entrepreneur who helps healthcare innovators navigate the U.S. healthcare system. He's the founder of ABIG Health and previously served as president of emergency medicine and chief impact officer at Envision Healthcare. He also serves as a professor of practice at UNC Chapel Hill Business School and is a frequent media contributor and commentator on the future of healthcare in the U.S. Dr. Brown, welcome to Bluestock Talk.
Hey, thanks so much for having me today. I appreciate it.
Love it. Well, I first was introduced to you through ABIG, which is a company that you founded. And I'm really interested in what you're doing there because I feel like it's something that this industry needs so desperately. So maybe walk me through, what are your goals? What's your mission there? Because it sounds like you do a lot, but also it's very focused on like MedTech and in this space.
That's right. So let me give you a little bit of background of the why first. And I'll go ahead and first tell you what we do. So we help innovators in healthcare services and MedTech go from the ideation phase of their product or service and get to the point of commercialization. I mean, who knew that the American healthcare system was complex? I mean, right? Nobody had that idea. But what I noticed in my previous job, when I was working at a big healthcare firm, is that I knew my lane. I knew what I was working in. I knew as we were selling into hospitals and I was working in the emergency department or selling to hospital CEOs. And that in of itself was quite complex. But in that space, I also would have vendors come to us and want to sell to us. I would have new technologies and technological solutions come to my company and then sometimes go to the hospital and they would have me sit on conversations. And I started recognizing like, this is a really, really complex issue. And where I saw the gap is I saw innovators oftentimes great with their technology and having a challenge being able to translate that complexity to the relevant stakeholders. And let me just explain very quickly what I mean. So you have someone who's a technology wonk that's created a cool medical device or some type of software that could potentially save lives or make lives better for doctors and nurses. But when they get to the point of saying like, okay, hospital system, I want to sell my technology or service to your hospital, what oftentimes the people sitting around the table may not be the doctors. It may be a procurement officer. It may be the CFO. It may be the hospital president. It may be the chief medical officer. But having to be able to translate the value of the service that you provide to those key stakeholders was oftentimes missing in the conversation. And therefore, I would see the technology person walk out of the room, the innovator walk out of the room, or the entrepreneur. And the folks say, what the hell were they talking about? I have no idea. How the hell that's going to help us, you know? Yeah. And then there's this moment of, I feel bad for those folks. These are brilliant people that could be bringing really cool technologies and ideas. And either they didn't understand the need of the stakeholder. Like, what is the hospital president really caring about? What does the medical officer really care about? What does the nurse really care about? And then oftentimes there was this kind of confusion around who was the buyer and who was the end user, which are oftentimes in the American healthcare system are completely opposite, and the values and the interests are very different. And so I came up with the idea of ABIG, helping people get from point A to point B along the commercialization pathway, helping people navigate the complexity of this product lifecycle, going from ideation, getting through regulation, getting through reimbursement strategy, commercialization, market access strategy, and along that continuum, also how to translate the value of their service to the constituencies that they need to get that information to, whether it's investors or the end users, or it's the hospital or other buyers along the way. So I've built the team to kind of address those different places along the total product life cycle. And as we say in London, Bob's your uncle, you know?
I mean, it's so important to essentially you've created a translation service for those various audiences, because you're right. Like the way I talk to FDA is going to be very different than the way that I'm going to talk to CMS and the hospital.
Absolutely. That point, just so you mentioned 3 different constituencies. FDA looking at safety and efficacy, CMS looking at costs and outcomes, hospital also may be looking at cost and outcomes, but the margins are different, and also the end users are different, and the stakeholders are going to be different. And so, they're wanting to know, are you going to harm my security? Are you going, the hospital that is, are you going to harm my data infrastructure? Are you going to bring a virus in? Are you going to, are the doctors going to use it? And how much are you really costing me? And does it save me anything? And is this in our budget at all on their annualized budgets where timelines and take a long time? So I look at it as like, yes, a translator. But I also look at it as a navigator. And so it's kind of being that Magellan, kind of helping someone around the process and having that aperture widened at the front end of their commercialization pathway, or even in their ideation start point of seeing, if I'm a MedTech innovator, I need to not just be thinking about how do I get to the FDA. I need to be thinking about how do I create a scientific study that's going to not only please the FDA, make sure my indication is right, but also have the right data endpoints that's going to make CMS happy, so that I can not only get a broad indication and a broader market, but also the right dollar amount to be able to pay for the service so that it's profitable. And so we want to be able to help people understand that are innovators, so that they can plan, they can speak with their investors with confidence. They can know that these processes take a long time, and the FDA is just kind of like step 2 or 3 along the pathway, and not like the terminus. And so I think that's where some of the work that we do has been helping people.
Amazing. Yeah, because I think a lot of people talk about the valley of death, right? There's that phrase that's come up many times in articles, and a lot of folks will talk about it, that great, you've made it through FDA, and now what, right? Like now you have to make it through this whole phase in order to start selling your product and getting value back to your investors and whatnot. When is the time that you should have those conversations that you're talking about? Because I think we've almost created the valley of death because we haven't started the conversation early enough.
I that last statement is so critical. We've created the valley of death because we don't have the conversations early enough. I might use that if that's okay.
Totally steal.
So,
yeah,
I might just take it. Thank you. Done. But no, I think it's early. I had a conversation. So as I may have mentioned to you before, like we work in the United States and also in the UK and with European clients, and that's a really exciting and fun place to be. And one of the best client interactions or partnership interactions is when someone comes to us and they say, Adam, I don't know what I don't know, and I need you to educate me so that I can anticipate what's coming down the line, how much money I should be asking for investors, how much burn rate I'm going to have along this process. And so that I'm not just thinking it's just the FDA. I'm thinking like, okay, I've got to get through CMS. And I've got to get through the payer access or the payer strategy of private payers. And what does that timeline look like on average for my product or my service? And so the best conversation is the one where I have that founder recognizing in the very early stages of scribbling down on a napkin at a diner, what is, well, if it's in Europe, maybe a cafe, but scribbling down on a napkin, what is our pathway, and then coming to people that have helped them do that, help other innovators do that, or members of our team who have been the people at the FDA or at CMS or sat across the table of the boardroom at the hospital, like helping people kind of guide along the way. So it's at the beginning. That was a long answer. Just say it's at the very beginning. Because if you wait and you say like, okay, I've got $2 million in the bank and then my burn rate is going to be, carry us through the next year. And you're like, and now we're thinking about going through the FDA. Depending on what your product is and depending on like if there's predicate devices or not, and depending on a lot of these different things, you may need to be thinking about a lot longer runway and be raising a lot more money. So, and we want to be able to give some folks insight into that. Now, of course, we also work with large medical device companies and enterprise type companies. And what we find with those companies at times is that they don't have the pressure, the financial pressure necessarily that an early stage kind of a software company or device company or something like that has. But they also have budgets and they also want to save money and they also want to understand, and some of them have their own teams, but it's the crosstalk across the teams. It's the collaboration and the pulling together of all of those different pieces and puzzles that is something that we can certainly help with because we have all the people that have been there and done that along the pathway.
Amazing. And you bring up something that resonates with a part in the back of my brain of almost like we're trying to get healthcare, right? Or like these technologies or whatnot to market and get it adopted and get all these, these really cool things available to the patients that need them. But there's also like one of the things that you've written about, and I think what your company does so beautifully is it's also focusing on what's the health of those different stakeholders, right? So if we have a FDA that's not functioning, or we've seen it with even the change in EU, right? With all of the shift from MDD to MDR. And when there's things that are unsettled in those various key milestones or those key players, it really can impact also the timeline for these companies. And like you even said, like for the article that you wrote about, are the doctors okay? Or, like really thinking about
right.
even the health of the healthcare providers and the physicians and the hospitals. If those things start to fall apart, it really can imbalance the whole ecosystem of getting to market.
Well, it's so interesting that you bring this up. So yesterday I was on a webinar podcast with a UK company talking about how the politics in the United States can affect healthcare delivery in the UK. And so it's kind of to your point, is that you have to consider the stakeholders, even those transcontinental stakeholders, and how one affects the other. So let me give you a couple of examples. There's been this kind of the tariffs are on, the tariffs are off, the tariffs are on, the tariffs are off. But what does it mean? Well, what has happened, irrespective of what the administration's policy is or the state is, the UK has lost AbbVie, AstraZeneca, Eli Lilly have decided to now build their manufacturing operations here in the United States and pulled out of manufacturing operations in the UK. Okay. Now, if you're a US person, you're like, okay, that's great. We've got more manufacturing that's happening now in the United States. But here's where one needs to think, is it the best thing? There's a reason why those companies were manufacturing in the UK. And it's because labor is cheaper and some of the regulations are different, although there are some similarities, but the big one is the labor is cheaper. And there's other type of relationships that the UK has with other countries to get some of the other type of products and services necessary to manufacture some of these drugs at lower costs. Same thing with Ireland, same with other mainland Europe. And so when the tariff activity took place and the threat of tariffs, and they're still, of course, there, even though the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that under emergency declaration. Still, some of the die has already been cast, like the companies started coming over. And so now there's implications to the UK about their availability of drug in the next several years. But then there's also potential pricing issues that could happen now in the United States because the cost of manufacturing the drug is going to go up because it's more expensive to manufacture here in the United States. So that's one example. Another quick example is that because of the tariff threats, the Starmer government in the UK made an alliance with the United States called the December Agreement, where essentially they would have no tariffs on pharmaceutical products. And as a result of that, the Starmer government said, we are going to raise our pricing threshold for what we will pay for drugs. And which means that there's new innovations that could come in that were once too expensive that now can come into the UK. So that's a good thing. But here's the bad thing. NHS doesn't have much money. Their National Health Service doesn't have a lot of money. And that decision is a $1.5 billion decision, which in the United States doesn't sound like a lot. But then that's a big part of their budget. And so now a decision and a policy decision made by the United States has direct impact on the budget and the delivery of healthcare of people in the United Kingdom. So to your earlier kind of point, there are transcontinental, geopolitical, global type of activities that are going to affect MedTech devices, commercialization plans, R&D. And that point you made about even are the doctors all right? The physician's ability to kind of weather a new technology upgrade. I mean, my God, when I used to work in the ER and we had to have a night where it's like, it's Meditech or an Epic upgrade night and you had to go back to paper for an hour. It's like, if I had to do that again, I'm out, you know? And so, so even when you look at clinicians who are struggling with dealing with the latest and the greatest or the new initiative, we're not okay. And so you have to think about the broad implications and all of the stakeholders, from politics to providers to the producers and the payers and how it all works together.
Yeah, it is. It's the global ecosystem. I've never thought of it that way, but even when, it's the shift that happened in EU for regulatory, because I've always looked at everything from a regulatory perspective. We saw most companies say, well, there's the US. They have a very set class 1, 2, 3 for med devices, and it's 90 days for a 510K. It's like there were set timelines for things. And that certainty allowed them to say, we're going to focus on US first because there's a good market there. And we can tell our investors and our stakeholders, here's how long we think that path is going to take.
Exactly. But here's the kind of funny thing about that. Those pathway timelines were tracked and the teams were held to account until. And
Right.
then what we've learned now is because of capacity constraints within the FDA, the priorities of turning around those decisions, some of which, like through the 510K pathway, are still pretty intact, but some of the other pathways are not. And so the decision that a company may make to pursue a certain pathway could potentially damn them if there's not clarity on whether or not they need to be in that pathway or not, like if there's a predicate device or not. So like these are some of the important things that companies need to consider and why the politics and policies are inextricably linked to the ability to commercialize your product.
Yeah. And then, COVID happened.
What was they did? I kind of erased those years. I don't want to remember any of that. Someone said to me the other day, they're like, "Oh, Adam, do you remember?" So it was February 6th, 2020. I was at a conference in Las Vegas, and I was the dude with the aluminum tinfoil hat, saying like, "This is going to be a BFD.
Yeah.
Get ready, buckle up. China does not shut down their economy for shits and giggles. Like this is going to be a big deal." And I gave this big presentation and now we know what happened. It is the one time where it's like, I did not want to be the I told you so and be right about it. This was not a very good thing, but that was 6 years ago. And I cannot almost fathom how much life experience and how much has happened in that time frame. It still feels like yesterday in some reasons, and then so long ago, and time I want to forget,
Yeah. Time felt like it had no place in the past 5 years. I was like, I don't know. I don't know. Yeah.
Also true.
So what's the, go back to the article that you wrote because, and also because we're talking about COVID, I think a lot of what, healthcare and medtech is experiencing now is some of the trauma, the shared trauma that we've all had because of COVID. There was, a lot of advancements that happened very quickly because of COVID. So there are advances, right? Any sort of stress or, when there's something that's happening that's such an emergency, things change very rapidly. But I think there's a lot of doctors out there. And as you said, your comment about, I think the first thing that went that you had posted about not wanting to watch The Pit, right? Which is one of my favorite
Right.
shows, but I get it for people that
Yeah.
lived that experience and not wanting to relive that by watching a show that's supposed to be enjoyable and, entertaining. Talk to me some about like what is some of the shared trauma or the trauma that healthcare providers are experiencing and how that sort of shaped the trajectory of a lot of the tech that we're seeing come out.
Yeah. So I think that's a really important question, because many of us have thought COVID is over and everything's back to normal. But I think for a lot of healthcare workers that went through the trauma of COVID, when COVID ended, and I'm using air quotes if you're listening, when COVID ended, still providers were working understaffed, long hours, and all of the built up burnout that was present before COVID was now there after COVID plus the COVID trauma. So, you know, I go back to when I was a medical director of an emergency department here in Northern Virginia, and well, I'm in DC, but in Northern Virginia, and I remember vividly the times where the waiting room would stack up to 50 plus patients. And you're just like, as the ER doctor, you're like, I may be available to see those patients, but I don't have a room to put them in. I don't have a nurse to care for them or to intake them. I don't have, because there's a nursing shortage, or there's a nursing shortage on the floor, and there's not enough beds in the ER. And like, that starts to affect you when that happens on a day, and then something bad happens to a patient out in the waiting room or in the hall room. But when that starts to become a daily reality of every day, you're down 30% nursing capacity, therefore affecting your bed capacity, and you're boarding patients in the emergency department. That's the term we use for people being in the emergency department that should be discharged, but they're waiting for a ride home, or people that should be admitted to the floor, but there's no beds upstairs. So they're sitting there and they're just kind of waiting and hanging out. When that happens enough, that starts to become a moral injury. And you start to say, as a clinician, I could do X, but I can't because the resources are not there. Or what's worse is administration is saying, and I'm going to tell you how this ties into the pit. Administration says, go see those patients in the waiting room. And you're thinking to yourself, wait a minute. If I were that patient, I don't want to talk about my personal things out in the middle of the waiting room and announce it. And then as a doctor, I'm thinking like, I don't know that I'm going to get the best story from the patient in the waiting room and be able to truly examine him. So am I really taking the best care of the patient that I can? That was a daily reality for me as a medical director, as a clinician, all the way up through COVID, et cetera. And so when the pit came out, in the very first trailer scene, there's a scene where I want to call where Noah Wiley, I was going to say Dr. Carter, because I'm from the old school ER age, where Noah Wiley is standing there, and the nurse administrator or the hospital CEO, I don't know her position, came down. It's like, basically, get on board, go see these patients, go do this, go do that. And he makes a comment about like, we don't have enough nurses. And if you paid them enough, they would actually be here and would actually be taking care of these patients. It's really not that hard to solve. And the fact is the times that I had those conversations, it brought back just watching that 15-second little segment. And I can even feel it now, this kind of intensity well up.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I can't watch this.
Yeah.
It is too close. It is like, it's bringing back, I didn't get goosebumps. It's bringing back the really awful feelings that I had that I couldn't do what was best for the patients because the resources were not there.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I wrote that article. It's like, no, I can't watch the pit. I can't. I mean, maybe one day I can, but someone doesn't need to tell me, oh, Adam, you have to watch it, because I lived it.
Yeah.
I don't need to know what it's like to be on a really shitty ER shift and have patients threaten me, or patients pull a gun on me, and then like nurse administration said, I know this is a hard day, here's pizza. It's like, okay, I mean, like, I'm hungry. Yeah. Thanks. This is great. But that's not the solution,
Right.
And so I just wrote a follow-up to it, to that same op-ed, called "The Doctors Are Not All Right." And and it could be the doctors, the nurses, the technicians, the unit secretaries, the environmental services, anybody working in healthcare. It's just like the title has to be short. But because of the number of people that reached out to me afterwards, and this was, Allison, this was the crazy thing, is it was so many of the super strong, kick-ass, amazing nurses that I have worked with over the last 20 years that reached out to me on Facebook. Yes, I'm old, but Facebook, and said, Adam, I can't watch it either.
Yeah.
I left the ER 5 years ago. Or Adam, I started watching it and I broke down crying and I can't. And it was people that I also didn't know that just would randomly email me
Yeah.
and say, this is that, I can't watch it. So I wrote a follow-up article saying that, no, the doctors aren't okay. This is the stories that we're hearing. There is major structural issues, and tying this back to COVID. COVID may be over, but the trauma is still there. We still kill ourselves 2 times more than the general population as doctors. We still have rampant amount of burnout, depression, suicidality. It needs to be focused on and treated, because when the doctors aren't right, patients aren't right. All right.
Yeah, 100%. I think the show, and because I have not lived an ER experience, of course, right? I've had to go for some injuries in the past, but it has given me so much more appreciation for what goes on behind the doors. And I don't blame you for not wanting to go out into the waiting room, especially knowing the numbers of violence, or like that is, I think in your follow-up article, you talk about how many nurses are attacked, and that there was a guy that even said, well, I was going to shoot you today, but you were nice to me or something. And I was like, oh my God.
And he had a gun in his pocket. He had a full loaded gun in his pocket. I will never forget it. Room 11. I was sitting in a metal chair. He was sitting on the edge of the stretcher, looked at me dead in the face. Doc Brown, I'm so glad you're nice to me today, because I brought a gun and I was going to shoot you.
How do you?
And if that doesn't make you, that's one of those, you're just like, I'm really glad you didn't do that. I'm glad that you're feeling like we're connected. You know, I mean, like, what no one trains you for that shit. Like, that is not, no. But, and he turned out to be a nice guy. We took his gun away from him, and, and then we quickly got psychiatry involved, but still, like, but he was legit and he was real with his gun. And, so yeah, I think you're right. Your comment about, like, it gave me a window into the back office and things that are happening in the background. I do encourage people who especially are not in medicine to watch it. I applaud the show, because I think it has created a dialogue where doctors and nurses can feel more comfortable talking like I'm talking now about it. And I feel like at the same time, it's also created a vehicle to talk with Congress about things like restoring the Dr. Lorna Breen Act, that has provided a lot of resources around prevention, tracking, research around burnout, depression, suicidality of physicians. And so I think all of those things are really good things that have come out of the show. But that doesn't mean that I know what it's about. I don't need to watch it.
That's fine. Because AI is on everyone's brain recently, and seeing such a huge, sorry, I'm going to pivot a little bit, but we're seeing such a huge growth in AI-enabled devices and digital health tools, and for patients, but also for frontline and physicians in the healthcare facilities. From your physician perspective, and also just from what you're currently doing at ABIG, so what separates the technologies that actually improve patient care in your perspective from those that just like add complexity to the workflow? Is there a difference?
Oh, well, there's definitely a difference in some that help and some that don't help. And this is where engaging in clinical input and end user input very early on is extremely important. So maybe I'll answer the question that way. And that is, doctors don't want more clicks. Nurses don't want more steps, and patients don't want more complexity. So if you're creating solutions that are trying to address workflow issues or clinical decision support issues, the goal should be easier, better, safer, higher quality, and cheaper. Like those are kind of the things you need to be thinking about. And not that that's rocket science, but where the rocket science comes in is you got to talk to the people who are going to be the end users. Now, they may not be the buyers. They probably are not the buyers, but they are likely the people that you're going to have to convince for implementation. And so where I see, one of the first things I do when I start assessing some new products is, okay, I put on my clinical brain and my doctor brain and being like, okay, number one, would I use this in the ER? Would I use this on the floor? Or would my doctors, my radiologists use this I used to work with, or surgeons used to use this? Would they use this? And how is it going to make their lives better, safer? How is it going to do that? And if you tell me like, well, you have to log in, you have to do this, and you click through these different things, like, nah, that's not going to work. Like, is it integrated into the EHR? Have you worked on that? I mean, these are kind of questions that I'm looking at. One of the best and least sexy, but really, really great technologies is ambient scribing, and if you talk to most doctors, the problems to solve is I spend 60+% of my time like documenting, and that's not real patient care, necessarily. And so this idea around leveraging kind of ambient scribing to listen to you while you're talking with the patient, kind of formulating and drafting a note, pulling in critical types of information, that many physicians find that extremely helpful to them. I think the numbers are well over 80+%. Well, why did that work? Why are people adopting it? Well, it's made their lives easier. It's made their documentation better. It's been able to pull in information, and there's also not been major hiccups, like saying esophagus and sofa is what ends up getting written. It's like, the technology has been quite good. So that's an example of, I think, one of the best utilizations I've seen in AI and giving kind of clinical support to clinicians is in that ambient scribing.
Yeah, and it's reducing the sort of the mundane tasks, right? Or if it could be like a tool that's easily integrated. Yeah, sorry, I had to throw an AI thing in there. And I'm very curious and I'll let you know if the season 3 of The Pit brings in any more AI tools, because that would be very interesting.
Yeah, did they, it was just as a question, did they bring in AI tools into season 2?
I haven't finished season 2. I will say, like, the biggest thing that I always love is, there's some AI plot lines, but not from like, I usually love, and where I really nerd out watching medical shows like that, or even there was a show called Diagnosis. I think it was just kind of going through cool. It was one like a special that just kind of walked through different patients that people couldn't figure out what was wrong with them, or physicians.
Oh, yeah.
And so they crowdsourced, here are all the symptoms. What do you guys think it is? And so it's like early AI, but I love nerding out with all the cool devices that I see on The Pit, right? Where there's ones that do chest compressions where you don't have to have the physician doing it. And
so that I like that thing. If you've never done chest compressions, it's a lot of work, and I think there's a device called the Lucas, we used to use, and it kind of hooks up to the patient and does like the chest compressions. And what you learn, just as an aside, is that cessation of chest compressions to switch out a person, or to, in the old days when you used to do not just chest compression only kind of resuscitations, people would do their pumps and then they do like the mouth to mouth. Like, we don't do that anymore. And the reason is because you want to keep the blood circulating. And that device continually and appropriately goes the right depth and then continues to deliver circulation the whole time without cessation. And so that's a great example of one that is a device that's used that we don't sometimes think about. One of the other really great devices in the ER that I used all the time. So I'm old enough where we did not have a glide scope, and a glide scope is a visualization tool that looks in the back of the throat at the trachea and down to the windpipe so that you can intubate a patient, like put a tube down and put them on a ventilator.
Which is very hard, I've heard. Like, actually intubating somebody is challenging.
It is. And especially if the person's large, or if they have a short neck and they're depending on their chin. Sometimes people have small mouths. Like, people's bodies are different. And so, like, depending on the body, sometimes it can be very, very challenging. So I trained when you had to have direct visualization. So I just want you to think about this. You've got this thing we call a blade, this stick basically in the mouth that's kind of, the person's paralyzed and you're looking down there. You are in their business. Like, you are 6 inches away from the pie hole, looking down and being like, I hope this dude or this woman doesn't barf on me. Like that's what you're hoping for. Cause
Please, yeah.
yeah, oh, please. I'm real close. And that has now shifted to like we have a camera on the end of a stick that we basically can use, and then we glide the tube in, and that was something that happened in probably my last year or two of my last year of residency. I would say that was a great kind of device that protected patients, was safer, had first pass success, and but I still was trained on the old one in case the power goes out. Like I still know what to do with the old tools. But yeah.
Which is a valuable skill to have, right? Yes.
It is, especially if you're working in developing nations, that don't have those things.
Absolutely. So since we're kind of nerding out about different devices, are there any cool things that you've seen recently that were like, that's awesome, or that sort of struck your fancy?
Of course, I have seen, I'll tell you about two. One I can talk about openly with the name and one I can't. So one is a digital therapeutic, and it's a gamification piece of software that with PTSD and depression patients that almost like you could think of it as a Duolingo in some ways, that you use it on a daily basis, but it works with cognitive behavioral therapy to help train a patient in the way to think through things and process things differently. And the studies have been quite good. And that's just amazing that a video game that my mom used to say, stop playing that damn video game, go do your homework, is now could be, play that video game. It could save your life and kind of prevent depression and treat your PTSD. And that to me is just super cool.
Yes.
The second one is a friend of mine, Dr. Laura Zibners. She is a pediatrician, emergency physician. She's both. She's brilliant. She was actually one of my MBA students several years ago. But she and her co-founder founded a company called Calla Lily, and they developed a tampon that leaches out or releases progesterone or other types of medications. And this kind of drug delivery platform is a really important tool because for women that are suffering with miscarriage or trying to get pregnant, so they have infertility, the tools that are available to them are really uncomfortable shots, or they have to have some type of suppository that oftentimes leaks out. And so, and the ability to kind of gauge how much drug is being delivered through these other type of measures, not necessarily ejectable, but the inserted suppository is not that great and is very uncomfortable for women. So, with their technology and their device, they've gotten grants out of the UK. They just announced a collaboration with Merck. I mean, these are really exciting things that people are seeing like, hey, guess what? Half of the population of the world are women, and a lot of women have issues that have not been addressed for a long time, and leveraging old school ways. And we need some new ways to be able to treat women and have other drug delivery devices for hormone treatments, a host of different types of medications that could be delivered that way. And so I think that's a really cool, interesting device that is leveraging an older technology, i.e. a tampon,
right,
with a medication. Side note, inserting a medication to the end of a tampon and allowing the tampon to do the tampon thing that it's normally supposed to do, but also kind of also release drug, is a very complex process I have learned along the way.
Yeah.
But that's an amazing kind of tool or device that's come out. We don't usually think of a drug delivery tool as a device. It is.
Right. Yeah, definitely. The combination product group at FDA has been busy, right? Because there are so many things that are either drug, biologic, or device, or, any combination of those three or all three of them. And so understanding how those should be regulated is really fascinating. That's very cool.
Very fascinating.
I'm gonna check it out.
You should definitely check it out.
The final question I always ask this of all my guests on the podcast is there a device, or can you walk me through a time when a medical device or technology genuinely changed your life or the life of someone that was close to you?
So that answer is yes. I'll personalize it for me. So a little bit of history. I was born with HSV keratitis. That's herpes simplex keratitis, and that's where the virus infects the cornea of my eyes. And back in the old days, even though I'm 22 years old, no. Okay. So many
Yeah.
multiples of that.
Same.
So even
Same.
though, and back in the 70s, they did not have the treatment availability then like they do now. And so, I remember as a kid that was 5 years old having a breakout, my eye get red, have pain. And then I was on acyclovir and drops and viroptic drops and things like that for days. And over time, I got pretty severe corneal scarring, just because like the cornea's tissue and with multiple outbreaks, you can get scarring. And what that did is that created my vision to be things that were in front 20 feet away from me would look like they were 80 feet away from me or 100 feet away from me. And it also was distorted. It was like trying to look through stained glass or through wax paper because that scarring was right in the central vision view. I was a pianist, organist, had big, thick Coke bottle glasses. I mean, no one ever picked on me. No way. No,
No,
I was right. I was definitely bullied. Um, but it created over time, it became really hard for me to see. And in medical school, I actually lost my vision through another outbreak in my very first year in medical school where I couldn't even see to take a test. And I had voice proctors that would kind of read the test to me, read the question. This is A, B, C. And as a visual learner, that was not very great. And I remember, and this is getting to the device part, going to during that episode in my, it happened again in my third year of medical school. I was on my OBGYN rotation and I had an outbreak. And I had already had an established ophthalmologist in Greenville, North Carolina, where I went to school at East Carolina. And she said to me, she's like, there's rigid gas permeable contact lenses that we could start using. There's a risk. The risk is you could have an outbreak. The contact lens could create an outbreak itself. But because we now have valcyclovir or Valtrex, you can take that as a preventive while preventing, an outbreak while wearing the contact lens. So let's say it was a Tuesday. I was on my OBGYN rotation. I was working in an OB clinic. Here I am doing too many pelvic exams. There's a reason why I'm not an OBGYN doctor, but doing pelvic exams and pap smears, and everything was quite Monet. We'll just say like it was very like there's something down there. I'm kind of hoping I'm in the right spot, etc. I go to the ophthalmologist that afternoon. I get my hard new contacts, not so comfortable. Took a while to get used to, but the next day I go into clinic and it's like, holy shit, I see the pink donut. I can see it. I can cervix. I can see the cervix. It was so clear. And so I couldn't believe now I was going to surgical procedures and things that I didn't realize how little I could see. So fast forward now 20 something years, I'm still wearing hard contacts. My vision with the contacts are close to 20/20. And I can see I'm just now on the older side of things. I have to wear reading glasses, but that fundamentally changed my life as a doctor and probably some patients' lives too, because I could see more what I was doing.
Yeah.
But that fundamentally changed my life. And to this day, I don't know what my medical education, my residency would have been like had I not had the ability to see, because I went through a time in medical school without the ability to see, and it nearly kicked me out of medical school. So
Yeah.
it absolutely changed my life.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that story. That is very cool. And you think of something so, it's a gas permeable contact lens, but
You're thinking like not a BFD. It ain't like defibrillating hearts. It's not. No, it changed my life so I could defibrillate hearts.
yeah.
Oh,
that's very cool. Very, very cool. Thank you for
So
sharing.
I'm very grateful to my ophthalmologist back in Jim Sloan, who was my ophthalmologist when I was 5 days old, and the ophthalmologist back in Greenville and the team there. And then, the docs that are Dr. Alani, who still takes care of me up in Northern Virginia.
Amazing. Yeah. And our eyeballs are very important. I feel like I love to chop wood, and one of the things that I always make sure is that I'm wearing my safety goggles, because even our glasses are medical devices, right? And so I'm like, I have to protect my eyes at all costs.
You do.
So thank you so much. Well, on that happy note, I will let you go, but thank you so much for joining us. I have loved this conversation. I've learned so
I
much
have
from
too.
you, and I can't wait to actually meet you in person one of these days.
I know. I
Focus
hope
on
so.
that.
I'm sure we will bump into each other, and I appreciate the time and the ability to tell the stories. And folks, last thing, start early in your ideation phase of getting advice. It's super important. Don't spin out.
So, and maybe that's a great segue to how do people get a hold of you? Like, what's the best way to
Sure.
find you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn. That's an easy way. Adam Brown, MD. You can find me on LinkedIn. But our company, ABIG Health, it's abighealth.com. Pretty easy. You can find us through that. And of course, we're happy to help navigate and help you along the way.
Thank you so much. All right. Take
Thanks,
care.
Allison. Take
Bye.
care.